In this next article from Fake News Forbes, Supreme Court rules New York can't impose COVID-19 restrictions on house of worship. Do you have to say 19? It's not COVID-19 anymore. It's just COVID, coronavirus disease. There's a bunch of different kinds. There's SARS, there's MERS, there's and then there's the SARS-CoV-2. You refer to them all as coronavirus disease. You don't need to put the 19 on. It makes you look uneducated. It's also waste people's time. This is a British-born reporter named Jemia McEnvoy. Says, in a late Wednesday ruling, the Supreme Court's new conservative majority voted in favor of a challenge from religious groups to New York's coronavirus restrictions, temporarily barring the state from enforcing certain attendance limits on houses of worship in virus hotspots. With recently seated Justice Amy Coney Barrett casting the decisive vote. So thank God for Donald Trump getting in Amy Coney Barrett already. She's proving that the conservative justices are far better than these liberal justices. You probably don't know too much about the Supreme Court. I like to study the Supreme Court because I'd spent maybe 8 years fighting in court and on constitutional grounds on a nightmarish child custody proceeding. And I learned a lot about the Supreme Court, about the Constitution, and about originalism, which is from Judge Antonin Scalia. And originalism, before originalism, these judges used to just make up whatever they wanted. They really did. And the liberal ones were the worst. So you think these liberals are all about equality? No. Democrats owned slaves. They started the KKK. They were the quote-unquote liberals. The thing about the liberals is, yeah, they wanted everybody to be equal, but they didn't consider black people to be people. So they don't have any sort of credibility. But the originalism thing came about basically Judge Antonin Judge Antonin Scalia, and he said that before they used what is called evolutionism, which is where they would read the law and then they would determine what they thought the law was based upon what they thought the words meant and what they thought the law was supposed to be. Was supposed to mean. Sounds innocuous on the surface, right? But this is how you get insanely corrupt judges. You need to go back to the original meaning of what the people who wrote the laws meant. So when you do that, typically, you go through like the Federalist Papers, or you'll go through the conversations of a state legislator as they're crafting the laws. You'll look at the definitions of the people, what the words meant, because definitions change over time, hence the concept of evolutionism. And after Judge Antonin Scalia, the courts were revolutionized with this concept of originalism, and it's really gratefully benefited our court system. The liberal judges are not that. Like Ruth Bader Ginsburg absolutely was not an originalist. She was an activist judge. That whole Roe v. Wade thing, there's no right to an abortion. Okay? There is none. In fact, you actually have a right to your life, and there's no actual so you're having to define when that child's life begins, and legally there's really actually no definition for that. Nobody ever put it in the Constitution that life starts at conception or life starts at birth. So because of that, one must go legally, you must go on the oldest date. So Roe v. Wade is an example of an evolutionist judgment. And an originalist would have not voted for Roe v. Wade. They would have said, no, actually, you're trying to murder somebody with a coat hanger in your backroom abortion, and at the same time, you're committing harm against yourself. That means the doctor's committing malpractice. They're not allowed to do that. You might not like this, but if you have that much of a problem with it, you can actually change the laws. You can actually elect state legislatures that will enact laws to change the Constitution. And if enough people from around the country want to pass that law, I think it's like a plurality of the states, then that will be amended to the United States Constitution. If you don't have the votes, you don't have the votes. I'm sorry, but you don't have the votes. But when it says that you have the right to your life, then that means that you have the right to your life, regardless of whether or not you have a brain that's functioning. Because your brain will be functioning later. So if you're a vegetable and you're not going to be alive, I think they can terminate you. But if you're, let's say you're temporarily incapacitated. Let's say you're a child and then you got knocked unconscious. Does your parent have a right to kill you when you're unconscious? No, that would be called murder. What is the difference between if the baby is inside of a woman or outside of the woman? It's not legally defined, in which case you must go off of the earliest date of life. I personally wouldn't care if abortion was illegal. Americans' birth rate is 1.8. There's a man and a woman. You got to have 2 kids to make sure your family doesn't die off. If you have a problem with it, maybe you should not sleep with really sketchy guys that you wouldn't marry. I think most of the guys would agree with that. In fact, most of the women would also too agree with that. And if you do have a baby, well, your family's going to die if you don't. So that's a really good thing that your family's not dying off. Because if you have 1.8 kids, it doesn't take a genius to realize you can't have 0.8 kids. That means you're either going to have 0 kids, 1 kids, and then some of them are going to have 2 or 3, maybe occasionally 4 or 5. But your parents invested millions of dollars in, or on average, $1 million or more into each child. And it's kind of poopy when you invest $1 million into a woman and then she's like, no, it's all about me. I'm extremely selfish. I don't care if my family lives. So I'm just not going to have kids so I can just care all about myself. I want to get equal pay in the workplace. And then when I get all of the extra money, I'm only going to date guys who actually make more money than me. And so I'm not going to have a kid. So that means that I'm going to take all the money and I'm going to pocket it for myself. And then I'm going to have a husband who has a job who makes more than me. So we're just basically going to take all the money and then take it for ourselves because we're extremely selfish. I don't care about our family because it's my career is more important than our life. And it's like, yo, equal treatment does you no good if you were never born. Mothers love their children and their husbands. They're very happy. Maybe you shouldn't be a bullshit mom who causes your family to die because you wanted money. Because, well, your husband probably would have the same, you probably would have the same amount of money if you just got a good husband and you weren't being a hoe sleeping around with random dudes and then getting knocked up from some dude that you should not be having a baby with, because that's a really bad idea and you're an idiot if you're doing that. Going back to the Forbes article, key facts, the legal challenges were filed by the Roman Catholic Diocese of Brooklyn and 2 Orthodox Jewish congregations who argued the capacity limits on houses of worship imposed in the neighborhood of the COVID spikes by Governor Andrew Cuomo, Bromo's brother, in October violates the religious freedoms protected by the United States Constitution. Though federal judges and New York-based Second U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals both previously rejected the petitions from these religious groups, the Supreme Court ruled in the favor 5-4. I really don't like these liberal judges. It's always ends up coming down on a ideological basis, and the liberals got this bozo interpretation of the Constitution. Doesn't have anything to do with the Constitution. So let's read the First Amendment, right? What does it say? It says very specifically, Constitution of the United States of America, 1789. Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech or of the press, or the right of people to peacefully assemble, and to petition the government for redresses of grievances. So does it say unless there's a pandemic in there? No, it doesn't. So how are they shutting these down? They're saying that it's an emergency and that other people's rights will be violated if they go there. That's the premise of the legal argument. This is complete cockamamie bullshit. Not just cockamamie bullshit, but bullshit! So when it says abridge free speech, that means you can't lessen the times, places, and manners where people can speak. If you do so, it has to be in a situation such as somebody's yelling fire in a crowded theater and then it causes people to move out. That action is now getting translated into direct harm to other people. All right. Okay. So why is COVID a problem? Can anybody tell me in the comments below why COVID is a problem? COVID is a problem very specifically because it's the novel coronavirus and because we don't have immunity to it because it has some protein signatures on the outside of the virus that your white blood cells, also called leukocytes, are unable to basically smell. What they do is they go around your body and they smell for infected cells, and then they go and they eat those cells. And in order for them to be able to do this, they need to be able to actually smell the thing. It's kind of like, how do you tell somebody what something smells like if you've never given it to them? You're like, oh, it smells like flowers. You're like, what does flowers smell like? Oh, it smells sweet. Well, what do sweet things smell like? I don't know. Right? There's a cart and a horse problem here. So the way that your immune system works, I'm very knowledgeable about this because I modeled the immune system in a computer for my interactive gym environment and educational kit, which is kind of like OpenAI Gym. It allows us to train AI models. Hold on. It's going to allow us to train AI models. It's still not working. In virtual worlds so that you can get agents that can work in multiple environments so that you can do transfer learning. So what I know about the immune system is that your COVID is deadly because it causes an autoimmune response where your white blood cells are able to detect that there's an infection, but it can't tell which cells are infected. This is why COVID is giving you SARS or acute respiratory syndrome, because the leukocytes are eating the wrong cells. They're eating the healthy cells. When it's just like you got lupus. Right? Lupus is pretty gnarly disease. But very few people actually die from it. Let me get out the charts because, I mean, a lot of people still don't know this stuff. I've been going off on this stuff all summer. Here's the, from June 17th from the CDC, the death counts with COVID, and you can see with a sample size of 103,339 people that about half of the people were over the average age of death, and that the death rate amongst young people, there was, how many were there? 8 plus 5 is 13. 13 plus 13. There was, of the first 103,339 deaths, only 26 of them were under the age of 15. And under the age of 24, there was 151 out of 103,339. So flu will kill like some, I think like 2 or 3 out of 1,000 people. It's about the same as COVID. COVID is a little bit less, except for the 110X strand. So there's 1X strands of COVID that you have a 1 possibility chance of dying. And then there's a 10X strand where you have 10 possibilities of dying. These are the ones like the H1N1 swine flu. They're 10 times as deadly. So the way the virus works is that there's multiple strands of the virus. Each of the viruses has a different protein on the outside of them. And your leukocytes will need to be able to smell that, your leukocytes need to be able to fight that infection on its own using either a live attenuated virus vaccine or one of the others. And I think the one that's going around is the live attenuated virus. So what that means is that they basically inbred the virus. So what they did was they made it not deadly anymore. They bred it so it's instead of a 1X, it's a 0.1X or something like that, approximately like that. It kills about 0.1%, or 0.1% of the chance of dying, which puts it well within the threshold that vast majority of people's immune systems can handle. And this will basically allow the leukocytes to smell the proteins on the virus so that they can detect which cells are infected with COVID. So when you go on lockdown, what you did was you put people in isolation, and then they end up getting fat and depressed. So the lead determined there's 2 main causes of why you would die from COVID. 1, that you're over the average age of death. 2, that you're overweight, obese. And I've read that people who are not that overweight also too can do what? If they're not overweight, then they you don't have to be too overweight to actually get it. So 70% of people in the United States are overweight. So we got to make sure we include that into our statistical analysis. So I'm trying to prove harm. We got to prove harm here. So why did we lock down? Can anybody remember? Pull back out of your memory. Why did we lock the country down in the beginning? Comment down below. We locked down the country because we were trying to flatten the curve, right? We were trying to flatten the curve. And why? To prevent our medical systems from becoming overwhelmed. That was why we locked down. So this is the slippery slope that we've been warning people about. Is it starts out as we're just going to lock down for like 2 weeks in order to flatten the curve. Then it turned into now we have to find a vaccine to Now we have to save people's lives by preventing them from getting infected. And what's after this? So they're like, okay, so does anybody know why COVID is so deadly right now, other than the fact that it's a novel coronavirus? It's deadly because it's flying around. It's very contagious because it's a novel coronavirus. Right? It's not that the coronavirus itself is any more deadly than the flu. It's that it's flying around. And that's why there's so many people who are dying. Because when most people are dying, if they're over the average age of death, or if they're in hospice care, or if they're morbidly obese, it means that they're going to end up having an autoimmune system response from hold on. Wait. So this is the reason why it's like, okay, you can't prevent yourself from getting COVID. You're going to get it multiple times in your life. I've had the flu multiple times in my life. Last time I had H1N1, I was shaking. I thought I was going to die, and I was dumb, and I didn't go to the hospital. In hindsight, I did not know how deadly the flu was. I didn't. And I should have gone to the hospital. But we've never, ever, ever had a lockdown from the flu. Why would we have a lockdown then if this COVID is not as deadly as the flu? Because it's flying around and we don't want to overwhelm our healthcare system. But there's a big but to this. There's a 10x strand. So it's flying around, and the vaccine that is going around, they can't protect you from the new evolving 10x strand, the one that's going to cause the second wave. They can't protect you from that. The only thing that can actually protect you from that is the leukocytes in your body. And in fact, the vaccine isn't even protecting you from it. It's just allowing your leukocytes to smell it. And your leukocytes in your body are literally the only way that you can fight any sort of infection. If you did not have those, you would be dead. So, in order to prove harm, you're going to have to prove that our immune system doesn't work, or that there's not going to be any sort of 10x strands that later on I might be immune to if I get multiple different strands of COVID. You need to get COVID multiple times, and you need to get multiple vaccines. That's the only way that you can reduce your risk of death, aside from getting your weight down and taking care of the health problems. Instead of taking care of the health problems, instead we locked down and we made the health problems dramatically worse. So I would argue that there's absolutely there's no clear and convincing evidence that locking people down is going to prevent deaths. People are saying, oh, but it's going to prevent infections. Infections aren't the same thing as deaths. They're not. They're not. There's a 10x strand. That means it can kill 10 times as many people. There's multiple strands. That means if you get sick 5 times, you might get 3 different strands. So the first time you get sick with it, you have a 1x chance of dying. The second time you get it, you don't have a 1x chance of dying. You have a less than or equal to 1x chance of dying because you had it before, so your leukocytes can smell some of the protein signatures, but there's multiple different proteins. For instance, with the flu, with the H1N1, there's an NA protein and there's an HA protein. These also are in different strands of flu. They might have an HA protein, and another strand of flu might have an NA, but not both. H1N1 has both. In the 1918 flu pandemic, people think people died from the flu. This is incorrect. People did not die in mass numbers from the flu. Absolutely false. They died from pneumonia, from bacteria. in the pandemic hospitals. You didn't know that, did you? Look it up. It's absolutely true. Absolutely true. The people who had a higher rate of survival were the people who didn't get sick enough to go to the pandemic hospitals where they got the bacterial infections. These people with the higher rate of survival had been exposed to 2 different strands of flu before. One had the HA, one had the NA. And when you combined them both together, it gave you immunity from H1N1 because your leukocytes were able to smell the white blood cells. This allowed you to not die from H1N1. So it's actually far more dangerous for you to not get COVID because a vaccine cannot save you. You cannot stay in lockdown indefinitely. If we do so, we're going to destroy our economy. Wearing a mask is not going to protect you from a bacterial infection. The bacterial infection might have even came from you wearing the mask. Duh! So they're trying to say, what, you can't congregate in large groups. In Oregon here, and covered this last time on RSS Commentary, Governor Kate Brown shut the state down. There's a restriction on gatherings. Can't have more than 6 people in an area, even in your own home. And see, what it is they're trying to get old people to vote for them. They want to show you exactly how good of a job they're doing protecting you. And so what they're going to do is they're going to take one right after another. And so they're going to, once they take one of your rights, like, oh, you have to wear a mask. And you're like, and then eventually you get used to it. You're like, all right, like, this isn't too bad. And then they're like, oh, you got to restrict your gatherings to 6 people. And then at first you're like, this is just not freedom. Give me liberty or give me death. Doesn't mean unless there's a pandemic. And then you'll get used to that. And then later on they'll say, oh, nope, there's another thing we have to do. We have to take away this freedom. And then once you get used to it, eventually they're going to take away one freedom after another, after another, after another, until they've taken away all of your freedoms and it's turned into an authoritarian dictatorship, because that's the slippery slope. Do you really think that the Muslims who are forcing women to wear burqas, that they were conservative? Back in Iran, when the Shah of Iran was there, do you really think the people were conservatives that put the burqas on the women? No. Iran was the bastion of liberalists in the Middle East. They put the burqas on to make the women equal. That's why. It was an equality thing. That's why. They wanted all the women to be equal. So how do you do that? You take away their good looks. You make all of their looks the same by making them all wear a burqa. It's a leftist thing. It's not a conservative thing. The conservatives would say, well, definitely actually see that in the Quran. So, I'm going to know and 25 people in red and zone respectively. The First Amendment, and it says, Congress shall make no law respecting the establishment of religion. Prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So that would be gathering in large group would definitely be part of exercising your religion, or abridging free speech or the press or the right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for regresses of grievances. So going to church, that's by definition a peaceful assembly, unless, of course, you're a Muslim and you're screaming death to Jews or death to the non-believers. That would definitely not be very peaceful. But the Constitution is very clear. It does not say unless there's a pandemic. It says you can't abridge those fundamental freedoms. So how are they able to shut down riots? People are vandalizing. They're causing crime. That's a criminal behavior. So is it, and then you're yelling fire in a crowded theater. Is that free speech? No, because you're causing an action. If you tell people, I want you to go murder somebody, and that person murders somebody else, you're also too guilty of murder. But when it says freedom of assembly, it definitely means that you have the right to freely assemble. And there's no requirement of, unless there's the flu going around. And if there's the flu going around, then there's some % chance that somebody might die. And so then you don't have that, because there's always the flu going around. There's always some % chance that you're going to die. So what's the total % chance that you're going to die? Let's do the calculation. What is the total % chance that you're going to die? How many people have died so far? Take this and copy and paste and then move over here. Take this, and then what day of the year is it? It's the 332nd day. So we're going to divide it by that, and then times by 365. And so if the death rate continues on, as it's going to, there will be about 2.848 million people who die. And I want you to notice, here's the death count in 2000 and what was this, 2018, right? Yeah, this is 2018. There was 2,839,205 people died. So by these numbers, 9,000 more people will have died in 2020 than died in 2018. So the overall risk of death is just about the same as it is in 2019, because our population has grown by some number of millions. And I think it's like 15 million or something, like crazy high number. And so it's basically the same. So there's no increased chance of death. So immediately this discredits anything that they're going to have to say. So you have to say not just that they might have some sort of chance of dying of COVID. You have to show that there's an overall increased likelihood that this is going to happen. It can't just be like, oh, well, maybe somebody might get sick and then they might go to the hospital. It's like, okay, well, what is there, like millions of people dying or something? I'm kind of confused. Because there's an overall chance that you're going to die. It's not just like I have a chance of dying of COVID and then, we got to lock everything down. There's an overall chance of dying. And if our overall chance of dying is the same as the previous year, you're an idiot if you try to lock down and destroy our economy to save people. Let's look at the cost of what this is going to do. I've got an article up here that's got the cost of, look at this, from the Daily Mail. $6 million borrowed for every COVID death. They're taking out $6 million in loans to save every single one of these COVID patients' lives. And all of that while the rate of death is approximately the same. It is the same as 2018. There's no sense in this. The only reason why COVID is deadly is because it's flying around, because it's a novel coronavirus. That's the only reason. Because more people are infected with COVID, that means that the death count will be statistically much larger. So let's also look at, how long is this video? 35 minutes on this video. It's too long. So how many people died of COVID yesterday? So there was 1,551 people that died yesterday. So that sounds like a lot immediately, but do the math. Don't look there's 330 million people in the United States. That's a lot of people. That means you can get a small statistical anomaly can make very large numbers when you have 330 million people. So let's figure out how many people died per day in how many people died per day again? I think I had the number up there, but oops. Oh, that's not it. So let's divide this by 365. This is how many people died per day in 2018. On average, 7,708 people died. What percent is this? So it was 1,551 divided by this. So that's about 19% of the people that died had COVID. What's the infection rate? What's the test positivity rate? You got to look at the stats. Don't look at the numbers. Analyze the numbers and look at the stats. Test positivity rate. (11 in 27). Hold on. Where was it? That's a statistical anomaly. So it's 10.7%. So about 10.7% of the people that they tested positive for COVID. Does that mean that 10% of the people who died on that day died from COVID? No. It means that 10.7% of the people that died on that day would have had COVID anyways. That's what it means. It means that when they tested these people that died, a certain number of these people would have had it in their system. Most people who die from COVID don't get SARS. They end up just dying, like they're dying from old age, and it's not like they have the full-blown SARS. They're like dying of old. It's like they got a bunch of stuff in their system that's taking them out at the same time. It's not like they're on a ventilator. Like there's a small percentage of people on the ventilators. Me personally, I'd rather die than be hooked up to the ventilator. Honestly, I built open source ventilators. I know a lot about them. Don't know everything. I know most of the things about them, but I'm not convinced. I don't want to be on them. I want to get thin and get myself really healthy so that when I do get COVID, I have a very low chance of dying. In order to do that, I need to go to the gym. I also need to be able to have contact with my friends so that I'm emotionally happy, because your emotional health also is highly statistically tied to your death rate. Actually, your being a happy person definitely affects the death rate. So what's Cuomo's? So in this next article from Newsweek, New York Governor Cuomo says Supreme Court decision overturning COVID restrictions for religious service has no practical effect. Okay. All right. So, and as he said that because it's already been moot. No practical effect. You went to the Supreme Court, the highest court in the land, made a ruling that set court precedents. Obviously, this is going to have a major effect because it shows you just can't restrict religious services, man. Like you're going to have to show there's an evidentiary procedure. Sorry, my jaw just popped. I've got that whatever, sometimes your jaw locks up thing. Mostly women get it. I don't know. I always got women problems. You're going to have to show with clear and convincing evidence that there's a substantial harm that requires them to not be allowed to be in large groups of people. So, is there any sort of laws that say you have to go to a hospital when you're sick? No. There's not a single law that says that you have to go to a hospital when you're sick. That's just absolutely not true. The entire reason why we lock down is absolutely not because COVID's very deadly. It's because it's flying around and there's a lot of people infected, and then that can increase the load on the hospitals. So if that's not happening, if you're not going to the hospital, you're not putting stress on the system. You're not. You have a right to die in your house from the flu. If you get the flu and you don't want to go to the hospital and you die in your house, that is your right to do so. But they're basically saying you don't even got a right to get the flu and then die in your own house. It's like, okay, obviously this is a slippery slope that we're going down, leading into authoritarianism where they take one right after another, and then eventually they keep your people in a compromised position, and then what you get is you end up, all the predators in the system will come and they'll go start getting on the pile on top to keep you on the bottom, and that's because that's how people work. People are predatorial. People will take they will prey upon people who are below them in the social hierarchy in order to maintain their status of them above them on the social hierarchy. You have to expect this. And so this is why freedom is, you can't just like give your freedoms up one after another, because we've already got this Citizens United ruling that allows dark money, unlimited dark money, to be funneled into campaigns in the form of media and other speech. They don't have to disclose who donated to the campaign. And this allows foreign governments to influence our elections. And they're going to do it through media. And then where are you getting this media at? On social media, through the Democrat-controlled Twitter and Facebook and Quora. That's where you're going to get it. You're going to get all your information from people who are tracking you all over the internet, who are censoring your free speech, and are securing an international monopoly on their social media. When that happens, they're going to end up generating massive amounts more money than you, because they have privileged access to data that you do not, and the data is includes your data, stuff that you didn't even know that they had. And they're selling this to hostile actors who do not have your best interest in mind. So this is where the problem, where we start giving up these rights to the federal government, and then now the corporate world comes in. Now you got China sneaking in the back door. You got Russia. Well, I honestly don't think Russia's a problem. Honestly, dude, I can't think of anything other than boogeyman tactics. Really, they're a rival. They're not an enemy, dude. I mean, what? We never even went to war with them. We had some proxy wars, but they were with other. It was really against communism, but they're not communists. They're like oligarchs over there. Honestly, man, I really do think that people are just flipping out about Russians are totally not like doing a power grab to be the world's number one superpower, man. Russia's got their own problems, and they're looking for allies to help protect them from China, because China is a major problem. Absolutely major problem. They're trying to take over the South China Seas. China is influencing our elections. They are dumping massive amounts of dark money into our elections. They are putting out massive amounts of propaganda to prevent us from enforcing our immigration laws and to maximize the amount of immigrants that we take in, because it allows them to funnel their people into our country. It allows them to overpopulate our country so that they can remove the white man from this country, because when you change the language, you change the culture. And what they're trying to fight is they're trying to fight what is called cultural Marxism. They are trying to fight using cultural Marxism, which is a detestable belief that has killed hundreds of millions of people in the past 80 years. That says that it's not Marxism that failed. It wasn't Marxism that caused World War II. It was the culture that failed, and we need to change the culture because they're either racist, or they're sexist, or they're xenophobic, or they're religious, or they allow free speech. And once you change that culture, then you can have Marxism. And that's the absolutely most detestable thing about what the Chinese have been doing. They have been trying to change our cultural landscape because they do have mastery skills in cultural Marxism. They do know how to take out cultural institutions and remove specific languages in order to change people. It's because what you do is you end up getting people to self-censor themselves. You make certain things taboo. You change the definitions of words by expanding them and then cutting some things out. And then you change the context in which they are appropriate in, and the repercussions for whether or not you use these words out of context or in inappropriate situations. And this allows them to control the narrative by controlling the language. The language is extremely important. Once you start so it's like, we've always said in America, no, English is our language. If you want to be here, you have to learn English. Why? Because your ass going to be broke. You want to come up in America, you need to learn English, or else you are going to remain at the bottom of the social hierarchy. It's not because Spanish speakers aren't allowed here. It's because countries have languages. Every country has a language. The UK, English. French, German, Russian, they speak Russian. Chinese, speak Chinese. Japanese, speak Japanese. Right? Doesn't take a genius to know this. What happens when you get people in Japan to speak Chinese? You've taken over Japan. What happens when you get Germans to all speak Spanish? You've taken over Germany. What happens when you get the English speakers to speak Spanish? You've taken over their culture. It's called cultural Marxism. They do it through the Hollywood. They subsidize bad movies. What they do is they they're in China. They are communists, so they can get a large amount of money from the government to make the movies, and then they pirate the movies there. They don't pay for things in China. They're communist. They're really National Socialist, actually. They're not communists because they allow private property ownership, and they have a steep social hierarchy. They do not have a flat social hierarchy. Communism has 4 tiers. You can look them up. There's farmers at the bottom, artisans above them, soldiers above them, and the government at the top. And at the top, tippity top, you can have a ruler. But the moment you have a steep social hierarchy where you have a bunch of poor people and then you have a bunch of rich people, then you've created a steep social hierarchy. The entire point of communism is that you share everything equally. But to them, to the Chinese, they're sharing all the movies, pirating them, and then the government will give money to Hollywood, and then that allows them to use Hollywood to do cultural Marxism. What they do is they ban specific movies, and they give more money to specific movies where they want to push a narrative, where they like the actor. If the actor is pushing the pro-China narrative, the anti-racist, feminist, anti-xenophobic narrative, then they basically greenlight those movies. They allow those actresses and actors to come up in the Hollywood scene and to dominate it. And this allows them to perform cultural Marxism, to change our language, to change the words that we use. Because you got to think, these movies are a large part of our culture and our language, like our slang, all comes from our media, our documents, our books, our movies. And so when they are able to subsidize bad movies, such as replacing a formerly white male character in a badass movie with either a minority or a wham-man, then it allows them to make institutionalize anti-white racism. So this is basically a method for them to remove the white males from their seats in power, and then they put the women on top of them. And what this does is it causes the men to be unable to breed with the women. Women typically want to date men who are higher up in social status than them, who are more financially well off. Families oftentimes will not give people like me, who are broke Joes at the bottom of the social hierarchy, they won't give us the time of day. So when you give the women and the minorities diversity tickets so that they can come up before the white males, what you do is you push the white males down in the social hierarchy. And then this causes, what does this have to do with New York Governor Cuomo? Don't ask me, dude. Tangent alert, tangent. This allows them to perform cyber warfare operations on us, a psychological warfare operation through the internet. And it allows them to control our culture by controlling the narrative, the words that we use, who's allowed to say them, what groups of people are in control of Hollywood, of social media companies. And then it allows them to become the world's #1 superpower. So what does this have to do with this? Hold on. I'm going to tie this in. What is this? Oh, so did I say anything about China? All of this stuff is coordinated. I really do think the Chinese government manufactured COVID in order to bankrupt our economy. So you got these China COVID. Everybody remembers these images. The fumigation scenes where the Chinese were going around fumigating things, right? Why were they fumigating for COVID? Can anybody tell me why the Chinese were fumigating for COVID? I'll give you a hint. They didn't know whether or not that would be effective or not. They were doing it to drum up massive amounts of fear. You have people in hazmat suits going around spraying some sort of disinfectant stuff. What does that do? It makes you afraid. And then the other effect, it makes you think that China's doing a good job at controlling it, right? So it appears like they're trying to help, but in reality, they're actually hurting. They're trying to make it so that we all get really afraid, so that when the China virus that came from the Wuhan lab where they study coronaviruses, where those coronaviruses actually were, and where they were mutating those coronaviruses, and in fact, they could have mutated the coronavirus and then bred it with another virus in order to get rid of the genetic markers. The other thing that they did was they welded the apartment buildings shut. So you can see images here of the Chinese Nazi Party welding apartment buildings shut. Here they're, in this image, they're dragging someone out of a area that they're claiming the person is infected. Where's a welding one? Here's a video here on Reddit. The video is unavailable and private. Never mind. Sorry, I'm having trouble pulling up the image. You can look it up on YouTube. They were welding apartment complexes doors shut. The other thing they did was they built a massive pandemic hospital. And when they did this, it shows you two things. It shows you, one, you need to be afraid. The Chinese government is doing everything in their power to stop this. So the Chinese government is doing a good job handling the pandemic. This is a two-pronged strategy to one, instill fear, two, to shift the, three-pronged strategy. Two, make everyone afraid. One, make everyone afraid. Two, shift the blame. Three, show everyone that they're doing a good job. That's what they did. And so what does this have to do with the article? I'm tying it in. I'm going to tie it in. So when we lock down and we destroy our economy by imposing these restrictions on the houses of worship, we help China out. China is already bouncing back. See, the way China's game is they devalue their currency. They use slave labor from groups of people like the Uyghur Muslims and the hundreds of millions of impoverished Chinese people who live out in the countryside, as well as migrant labor that they exploit. And it allows them to bounce back very quickly, because what happens when you all of a sudden are really poor and it's hard for you to afford things? You buy cheaper things. Where do you buy cheaper things from? China. What does that do? Prevents us from manufacturing here, which does what? Gives them a monopoly on the supply chain, which does what? Allows them to be the world's number one superpower. It's a game. It's everything with these people is all, with the Chinese Nazi Party, everything is revolved around them being the world's number one superpower for one specific reason only. They're losing power. They're losing power there. And they have to show their people that they're doing a good job. If they can show their people that it was the Chinese Nazi Party that made China the world's number one superpower, then it allows them to, or it prevents, it makes it so that people don't want to overthrow the Chinese Nazi Party because they're doing such a good job. So why would you want to overthrow them? So I'm a little bit upset. Oh, here was this. We were looking at this. So I'm going to go back to the article. I'm sorry, I tangented it there. Cuomo in disagreeing with the decision, noted that the areas in question are no longer the zones that limit the number of people and says the decision will therefore have no practical effect. Except for that's not true. They've set legal precedents that later on in future court trials, they'll be able to say, in this case, the Supreme Court ruled that these lockdowns were unconstitutional. So it does have an effect. Cuomo's an idiot. He bungles everything up. The guy's incompetent. You got to get him out of there. All these Democrat running these big cities, they're all bad. They're all bad news. They're all incompetent. They're all see this is the fundamental problem with these people. Sorry, it's starting to get cold in here. The fundamental problem with these people are that Democrats try to help other people before they help themselves and their families out. Because they're trying to get elected, and the way that they're trying to get elected is they're trying to give you free stuff. They're saying, I'm going to help you out. Sounds innocuous at first, right? Like, yeah, that makes you a good person, right? No. It's just like the person who's generous. Why is the person generous? They want you to like them. They're not doing it out of the kindness of their heart. They're doing it because they're expecting something in return. That's why Democrats do what they do. And they wouldn't be doing what they do if the first person they're trying to help out is their family and themselves. Or the first people that they're trying to help out are their family and themselves. If they did that, none of us would be in this mess in the first place. Because if we all focused on what was best for us and our own families before we thought about other people, then we would all be acting in our own best interest. If you're only acting in other people's best interests, you're corrupt. You need to be acting in your family's best interest because we all have families. And if we all act in our family's best interest, we won't have any of these problems. That's the problem with these people is their policies fundamentally are based around trying to get elected by helping out some imaginary person. They're saying, we're going to help you out by bringing socialism, giving you a handout. Vote for us. So how does giving people a handout help your family? Oh, your family relies on handouts. No. Your family is not supposed to rely on handouts. If your family is relying on handouts, there is a structural problem. Your family should not be relying on handouts. Your family should be relying on hard work, not doing drugs, getting good grades, and running businesses, doing things the right way. How do you go about doing that? Do you run a business by optimizing everything in everyone else's best interest? No, you don't do that. You optimize things by making it in your family's best interest. Because what's in your family's best interest is in everyone else's family's best interest. Now, that excludes corruption, of course. I'm talking about things like outlawing abortion or having police. It's not in your family's best interest to not have police. It's not in your family's best interest to have riots on the streets. It's not in your family's best interest to allow China to do cultural Marxism through Hollywood. Not in your family's best interest to lock down the country and bankrupt the economy. It's not in your family's best interest to take away our freedoms one by one until we don't have any sort of freedoms. They're doing it because they're taking away people's freedoms to help someone else out so that they can get them to vote for them. And instead of that, maybe you should try to think about your own family first before you think about another family, because it's just like the plane is crashing. You need to put your own oxygen mask on before you're going to be able to secure someone else's mask. If you do not do that, chances are you're probably going to pass out trying to put the mask on the other person, and then you're just going to die. If you put the mask on yourself, then you'll be able to breathe oxygen and help the other person out. I think I'm done with this article. Sorry about the tangent there. If you like this content, smash that like button. If you think I suck, hit that dislike button, and then tell me how stupid I am in the comments down below. Don't forget, share this video on social media if you want to help the channel grow. And I don't have anything else to say. Thanks.